Hey, what's up, everybody? Today we got another book by neuroscientist David Eagleman. A couple weeks ago, we looked at his 2015 book, The Brain, The Story of You. I liked his work enough to buy a couple more of his books, and Incognito is one of them. I found this guy just by chance, just Googling neuroscience books. I never heard of him before, but he seems to be a pretty big deal in the neuroscience world. Just going off of the bibliography in this book, the number of times this guy has been published in the Science and Nature journals is pretty impressive. So, Incognito, The Secret Lives of the Brain, is about the different ways that the brain works. It's about consciousness, the unconscious, and some of the fascinating dynamics of the relationship between the two, and more. Your concept of free will may be seriously challenged and illuminated. This book is largely about the extent to which unconscious factors play a role in our daily motivations and behaviors. I don't think I'll ever get tired of these books about the brain. The brain is just too sophisticated, too complex, and too mysterious. But Incognito is a nice effort at shedding some light on some of the less intuitive aspects of cognition. This book is all about questions and answers. Some very interesting questions examined here are just how much should we trust our senses? How many entities am I and who is doing the driving? What is the relationship between incoming stimuli and the product of perception? And most interestingly, how has experimentation led us to our current understanding? Would you believe that it's completely within our technological power to build sensory devices and attach them to the brain to create new senses? What is really happening between sensation and perception? Essentially, you're sensing data, whether it's photons or pressure waves or whatever, and you're converting the information into electrochemical impulses from which the brain constructs a perception using organic systems evolved for these purposes. So then, what's to stop us from building a new interface and maybe help a blind person to see this is not science fiction, this is science? This book has a couple of objectives: casting doubt on free will and a deep exploration of the social implications of the ever growing support for the physicalist, determinist, materialist, reductionist, and the limitations thereof views of the brain and behavior and motivation. Chapter 1, There's Someone in My Head, but It's Not Me, asks, who exactly are you? What factors go into your decision making, and if those factors are outside of your conscious attention, how does that affect the answer to that question? Chapter 2 was on sensation and perception. This reminded me very much of one of my favorite books from one of my favorite scientists, Phantoms in the Brain by V.S. Ramachandran, which was the book that started my love for these neuroscience books. Chapter 3, The Gap, how much of our learning is conscious and unconscious, and the process of learning moving between the two states, the automaticity of neurological action. I won't go over every single chapter, but I will tell you that the book is fascinating from the first page to the last. Besides being a neuroscience book, this book also goes into psychology and philosophy. Eagleman discusses psychological findings over a neuroscience framework, and he discusses philosophical implications of neurological facts. There's so much in this book that will give you so much to consider, having a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation of what's happening inside all of our heads, as all these different areas of the brain are communicating in the neural storm of consciousness and, to a greater extent, unconsciousness. In fact, one of the main points of this book is that much of what drives our actions is happening below the threshold of consciousness and is largely a product of genetic and environmental factors over which we may have had no influence. For for being a pop neuroscience book written for a casual reader, this book gives you a lot to think about. Eagleman also talks about the Umwelt, which we learned about in Ed Yong's book, An Immense World. The Umwelt describes what you are able to perceive through the sense organs you have and the neurological hardware with which to interpret the information collected by your sense organs. Eagleman says, what you are able to experience is completely limited by your biology. Rattlesnakes can see infrared, honeybees can see ultraviolet, and humans can see what we call the visual range of light. To quote Eagleman again, each organism has its own Umwelt, which it presumably assumes to be the entire objective reality out there. Why would we ever stop to think that there would be more beyond what we can sense? Fascinating. Eagleman talks about rare brain disorders like prosopagnosia, anosognosia, synesthesia, alien hand syndrome, blind sight, different amnesias, and more, and bizarre behaviors associated with brain surgeries, tumors, and strokes. Many of these neuroscience books discuss free will, and Incognito's take on this topic makes this book a must read. Rather than just asking, to what extent are we responsible for actions which are influenced by forces outside of our influence, Eagleman draws attention to the fact that the culpability of criminals is progressively being determined by our technological capabilities to identify biological markers for criminal behavior. In other words, if Joe's brain tumor made him violent, how does this factor into our increasing ability to identify things like these tumors, and what does that mean for his legal culpability? As the data continues to mount, it's becoming more clear and less deniable that the separation between psychiatric behavioral issues and a neurochemical basis is an illusion, and this creates questions and it creates issues. There is so much in this book that will highlight how amazing and mysterious the brain is, and even the way we look at our place within this reality. It'll give you a lot to think about. This book captures many fascinating aspects of the relationship between actual reality and the neurological structures that show their owners what their reality is. One more quote from Eagleman: reality is far more subjective than is commonly supposed. Instead of reality being passively recorded by the brain, it is actively constructed by it. In the final chapter, Eagleman addresses what he calls the dethronement of man by science throughout history. We once thought that the Earth was the center of the universe. Cosmological observations proved otherwise. Many people once thought that humans were created as is in the image of an omnipotent deity. Evolution by natural selection has wholly invalidated that view. We once believed that we had conscious will over all of our choices and behaviors. Psychology and neuroscience, as well as philosophy, have shown that that belief is deeply flawed. Eagleman says that these revelations reveal a much grander picture, that reality far surpasses our quaint human suppositions, and that in the true sense of the word is awesome. Guys, this book was so good. I really liked Eagleman's other book I read, and this one was even better. I think one of the things that makes David Eagleman's writing so good is it's clear that it's based off of a vision. He isn't simply listing off interesting things. He actually has some things he wants to say and uses his knowledge on neuroscience to create this experience for the reader. So many writers try to do this and fail. Sometimes when reading a book, you get the idea that the person just wanted to share some stuff they thought was interesting, but with Eagleman, it's about a broader message. You're looking at smaller packets of information one at a time, and the overarching thematic structure comes into focus as you read on. And the closing pages wrap up the narrative so wonderfully as to incite even more wonder and awe for the brain and the universe. I don't know, he's just a good writer. Sometimes you get a scientist who also does writing. I'm tempted to say that Eagleman is a writer who also does science, but that wouldn't be fair to his career as a scientist. The guy is incredibly accomplished. If you want to see what I mean, you're just going to have to read this book, and I assure you, you'll be glad you did. This is an excellent example of don't judge a book by its cover. Look at that cover. It's not very eye-catching. It's not very interesting. It isn't exciting, and it certainly isn't pretty, but the book itself was so good. So it's true, don't judge a book by its cover. Okay, that's it for now, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you consider purchasing this book. This was a really good one. So treat yourself to Incognito by David Eagleman.